And warmer from the low, welcome to lovely Las Vegas for Cuss Soups with myself, Greg Oops Peters, and now part of the VSiN family of podcasts. We've got an excellent podcast for you. We're going to be joined in segment number 2 by a good friend of ours. We're chatting it up with Tristan Freeman of Bustin' Brackets and what we've all been seeing in college basketball here over the last few weeks. We're going to talk with him about the court cases that have been oh so impactful, and additionally with him, we have to dive in on what we might be seeing moving forward to these teams that might be still looking for signing some of these guys, and we also have to be diving in on what we're going to be seeing with the California case. We still have yet to get a resolution on that one, so that's big, and we also saw some big moves in the ACC over the last few days. Miami has been muscling up, and they might be getting Malik Renew. Additionally, we saw Louisville sign Seth Trimble. He's based out there in the city of Pittsburgh, so we're going to talk about that and a little bit about Duquesne. And then here in the first segment, we saw more news in college basketball. We're seeing more and more of these guys commit to places, so we're going to give you guys a roundup of that. If you do have a question, comment, segment idea, what have you for this podcast, you do have one of two ways to fire those in. First one is my Twitter/X timeline at gunit_D1. Keep in mind there's the name does not matter, so as per usual, please do send these into the timeline. And the other way is find an Apple Podcast review. If you rate this podcast 5 stars, it is very much appreciated. And then from there, you're able to fire in whatever you'd like to hear on this podcast via that 5-star review. Very much do beg with you, do play with you. Please send in these Twitter/X questions. Now, much more rambunctious offseason than what we've seen in the past. Typically, this time of year, I am begging and pleading for anything whatsoever. We have had ourselves a lot of fun here over the last few weeks, so let's keep it going, and just any way that I can get you set for the upcoming college basketball season, I do want to do so. And the conference previews are going to be continuing. Mountain West will be coming up in the next few days. I'll try to get the Patriot League handled within the next week or so as well, and then we are into even more of the more interesting conferences like the Southland, the SWAC. We're going with more of the low/mid majors first, which unfortunately Mountain West now a little bit more of a low/mid major, and then big boys are going to be at the end. And in terms of big boys, we did see a trio of guys signed via the transfer portal. Now, this might be one or two more because we're getting news just all throughout, but I mean, for Auburn, they get a nice, shall we say, ancillary piece in Kobe King. Long and winding road, began his career over at St. John's, then goes to Tulane, Butler, Utah State, and now he's going to be over at Auburn. And you have to think that for Kobe King, he's going to be a little bit more of a reserve, but hey, he was a solid player last season. He can come in off the bench, be able to give you a little bit of scoring last season when he was over at Utah State. Was a 7.5 point per game guy, did shoot 39.5% from 3, and in each of the last 3 seasons, he shot at least 37.9% from 3-point range, so that's going to give a little bit of pop to Auburn. Guy that stands right around about 6'2", but he does give you a few rebounds. He was a reserve over at Butler and Utah State. Really, his heyday was over at Tulane, so I'm not thinking that he's going to be going out there and lighting the world on fire for Auburn, especially with the way that Auburn has been able to maintain a lot of their own from a season ago as well. Obviously, they had a lot of losses with that rambunctious schedule, but you have Todd Pettiford back, who, 2 years ago, he probably could have been a first-round pick. Kevin Overton is back in the fold as well. They've got some nice sides with Bucky Oboye coming in. Thomas Dowd has some good versatility. For Owen Freeman, he should be able to help things out down low. Now this is a really nice cog for an Auburn team that, let's call it what it is, they're not going to be one of the top teams, in my opinion, in the SEC. You've got Florida, you've got Texas, you've got Alabama. Heck, Vanderbilt was able to muscle up a little bit. Tennessee, you just go down the list. But I do think that it's going to be a solid year for Auburn. I think that they get back towards the middle of the SEC. And, heck, middle of the SEC, I forgot about Arkansas. That's probably good enough to be able to get you in the top 25. So that's going to be a solid move for them. Georgetown, I've been liking what they have been doing here in the offseason. They bring in N.J. Benson. He's got familiarity with the Big East, as last year he was over at DePaul, and he was really the top rebounder for them. 7.5 boards, 11.5 points per game. Not going to go out there and pop it from 3-point range, but 2 of the last 3 seasons, he was able to supply a block plus per contest as well. And for Georgetown, the low post play over the last few seasons has been highly inconsistent. Last year they did a nice job taking care of the ball, but they just weren't able to really knock down threes. It's a little bit of a new look team, and they've got some guys in there that I really think have some upside. Marco Jackson, he was a guy that just really never found his footing when he was over at Kansas. If Jalen Lowe is fully healthy, we saw what he was able to do over at Pittsburgh 2 seasons ago. That's rock solid. Chula Mayshot, he was a 2+ block per game contest guy over at Charleston. Caleb Williams is a guy that they're going to be banking on for a nice little bit of a leap in production as well after he was solid for the team last year. Now you add in there a guy that's going to be able to help out on the boards. You've got even more size because really the lone guy outside of Williams above 6'7" with actual playing time, because they're bringing in a 6'9" freshman in Justin Caldwell, that would be Mayshot. So this is going to be able to give them some added size. This is going to be able to help them out down low. And for Georgetown, I don't know if they're quite an NCAA tournament team. We've seen the teams like Providence and Xavier be able to muscle up in the Big East. Marquette, I think, is going to be back in full force as well, but no question about it, this is a really nice move for them. And then for Oklahoma, I feel like they really fell behind a little bit in the SEC just because of all the guys that have been brought in from so many other schools. I probably had them in like my bottom 4, bottom 5. This is going to help them out big time. They bring in BJ Turn It Up Edwards. He began his career over at Tennessee, so he's got a little bit of familiarity with the SEC, though. That was a long time ago, and he wasn't doing much for them, but really took off last season over at SMU. 12.5 points, 6 boards, 5 assists, 2.3 steals per contest, shot 37% from three-point range. Nigel Pack is not going to be getting an extra year of eligibility, so they're not going to be able to bank on that. So their backcourt, which was really the heart and soul of this team last year, in a little bit of transition, they do retain Xavier Brown. He's going to be a good running mate with him, and then with Pop Isaacs, you just don't know what you're going to be able to get out of him. He's a guy that really needs the ball in his hands quite a bit, but all of a sudden, this is looking like a team that I'm impressed by. Tyler Hendricks, he was a nice three-point shooter over at Central Florida along with Utah Valley. Connie Roofs is a guy that they're going to be banking on down low. He had some nice moments over at Louisville. Kai Rogers is a guy that's in 6'10", and Yak Yak at 6'11". They've got a few mysteries down low, and they were a team that, with their low post play, and it was a little bit rough, but we saw 2 years ago Oklahoma was one of the better three-point shooting defenses in all of college basketball. I think that they can return back to that form, and I have to throw this one in because we saw this one late in the night on Thursday, and this cannot go unaddressed. The fact that Charleston, they are looking all the more powerful, and we do have on our good friend Tristan Freeman. I'm going to ask if some of these mid-major teams might be able to really benefit from these fifth-year guys, because Charleston is getting Tavari Johnson. He played under John Gross, who's now the coach over at Charleston. Over at Akron last year, had a massive year. 19.7 points, 5 assists per contest. He was shooting about 37.5% from three, a career 38.3% three-point shooter. He was able to throw in there a little bit over a steal per contest as well. And for Charleston, I thought they were going to be towards the top of the CAA. I thought that they were going to be in cahoots with UNC Wilmington for that top spot, and I still might go with UNC Wilmington when it's all said and done, but he instantly becomes, at the very minimum, a top 2 player for them. Eli Ellis, who comes over from South Carolina, he no doubt is going to be big, but now you've got a 38% three-point shooter, which is big because Ben Bradford, who comes on over from Charlotte, he's a nice scorer, but he's not necessarily a great three-point shooter. Xavier Abreu, he was solid over at Northeastern, but he's got a few injury concerns. Braden Pierce is a 7-footer that is a little bit unproven, but you know that he's going to be solid. Now you add in there a nice rock-solid scorer. Max Green is a guy that when he was over at Holy Cross a few seasons ago, he was solid. They're taking a little bit of a shot on him after last year. He was relatively on the bench over at Northwestern, but a massive get here for Charleston. All of a sudden, arrow's very much trending northward for them, and the arrow always trends northward on this podcast when we get on one of our good friends in Tristan Freeman. He joins me next right here on Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Peterson, now a part of the Beats and Family Podcast. Side edge this college basketball season? Well, VSiN experts use CBB Analytics, the most comprehensive college basketball analytics platform in the world. See injury impact, on and off data, clutch time performance metrics, first versus second half splits, and so much more. Utilize the promo code of VSiN, that is VSIN, to get $30 off and find your betting edge over at cbbanalytics.com. That is cbbanalytics, all one word.com. For anyone that is new to VSiN, well, I wish you a friendly hello. This is an attention to anyone that is new to VSiN because you're able to get some free stuff with our daily newsletter. It's a great way to catch up on everything that's happening in the sports betting world. It's delivered straight to your inbox every single morning. VSiN's newsletter offers picks, data, strategies for the day's betting menu, and so much more. Sign up for free today over at VSiN.com/newsletter. That's VSIN.com/newsletter, and start receiving your free newsletter tomorrow morning. That is VSIN.com/newsletter. Stay ahead of the game and bet smarter with VSiN. We're back here, Love You Las Vegas for Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Peters, and now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. Always great to be joined by this man. As we've got Tristan Freeman aboard, he does such great work over at Bustin' Brackets, taking a look at this great game that we all know and love of college basketball. Additionally, with Tristan, I know that he's doing a little bit of work over at Sleepers Media, Field of 68. He's based out there in the city of Pittsburgh, so he's doing a great job looking at the Panthers. He's looking at Duquesne, Robert Morris, and so much more. All 12 months out of the year, doing a great job being dialed in on this great sport of basketball. You're able to follow him on the old Twitter /X at HoopsNut351 altogether. And Tristan, it's always a pleasure, my friend. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for having me, Greg. Appreciate it as always.
Always appreciate you, Tristan. And Tristan, typically when it comes to this time of year, we're looking at like way too early top 25s, getting set for conference previews, what have you. But it has been a very different offseason. And before we dive in on the just gob ton of moves that we've been seeing over the last few weeks, just what are you making at this time right now in college basketball where it just feels like there's a big giant lack of clarity and there's about 500 court cases that we're waiting to have settled?
Yeah, I mean, just in the last 24 hours alone, we've seen a couple potential starters and some bench pieces commit. We haven't had, some of the big names that's been, linked for a bit. So I think that's coming. But I think we have a scenario where there could be like 5 or 6 teams that find itself into the, final preseason top 10 rankings. And, it's exciting, if you like chaos, but for those who kind of want some clarity, it's a bit, I wouldn't say frustrating, but it's definitely a lot with just 80 days left to go in the offseason.
Yeah, I mean, it has been wild to say the least. And I'm not sure about you, but I would say the biggest name that's come off the board right now is Seth Trimble, because we're still waiting to see if we really get someone like a Braden Smith or something like that, which I'm sort of doubting. Waiting on Jackson Kaler, Donovan Dent, and that California court case. But what did you make out of Seth Trimble going on over to Louisville? Because for Louisville, I really think that they're going to be changing their style for this upcoming season with having a little bit less three-point shooting, but bringing in a guy that was solid over at North Carolina last year. I'm really loving the offseason that this team is putting together.
Yeah, I mean, we know Trimble's a proven ACC starter coming off of his big year as a senior at UNC, and you pair him with Jackson Shelstad, and you have Emery, who can now be one of the top 6 men in the country, if that's where you want to put him at. So offense still won't be an issue for Louisville, but it'll just look a bit different than it did last year, which was very three-point heavy, which sometimes hurt them.
Yep, it certainly was, and I do think that that is going to be an interesting note there as well, because when it comes to the ACC, I really think that it's going to be a fascinating landscape out there, because Louisville, they did a nice job in terms of muscling up, and Miami has really been one of those teams that has been able to make some late moves. They bring in LJ Kaysen prior to all the court cases. They brought in a guy or two as well, because I know that one of the Allens got injured, and I think that they're a team that's really making some moves to try to be a just fortified top 4, top 5 team in the conference.
Yeah, and you mentioned court cases. I think the biggest name from the South Carolina list of guys looking for another year is Malik Reneau, who was their star player, averaged 19 and 6.5 last year. Assuming some of these other spots are filled and he just returns to Miami, now all of a sudden they have one of the best lineups in the country. And I wrote a piece for Bustin' Brackets saying that, hey, Duke's been the off-season favor in the ACC for the last 5 months, but both Louisville and Miami, assuming they do get Malik Reneau back, I think they have just as good a cases to make for being a team to beat in the ACC as a Duke.
Yep, I think that is so well said by you, and I'm certainly taking a look at that South Carolina case because you mentioned it, Malik Reneau, he's the biggest piece in there, but we're also noticing a lot of mid-major guys that are in that court case as well. A few guys from UNC Wilmington, High Point, and I do think that when it comes down to it with a lot of these fifth-year guys, no doubt there will be some teams looking at ULSU that are very much going to be beneficiaries of having these fifth-year guys, but at the same time, too, I feel like many of these guys might be winding up going to mid-major schools, and I mean, we've already seen a team like a Loyola Marymount be able to benefit with picking up Javon Porter, and if a lot of these power conference teams are just out of roster spots, I think that these mid-major teams can do a nice job swooping in and maybe get guys that they didn't think that they'd be able to get.
Yeah, I mean, we saw a guy like Kobe King go from Utah State to Auburn, but he's clearly settling for a limited role off the bench. I think a lot of these other guys aren't necessarily ready to do that unless it's for, a top 10 caliber team. So yeah, I do think mid majors can ultimately benefit. But even with them, not many of them have money available. And I think for these guys looking for one last payday, are they necessarily going to find it at the mid major level? So I think it's going to come down to whether or not they can get money and or how big of a role can they get, because I'm sure some of these guys who are used to playing 25, 30 minutes a night for the last few years aren't necessarily keen to just getting 5 to 10 minutes at the most, even if it gets them a little more money.
Yep, I think that is well said by you because a lot of these guys, they're looking to be able to put out there some tape to be able to play professionally, even if that's not in the NBA, perhaps overseas, and this could be an opportunity for them to do so. As joining me on the show, we do have Tristan Freeman, who does such great work over at Bustin' Brackets, joining me on Coast to Coast Hoops, and this has been something that I've been saying over the last few weeks, and I truly do think that this is the case with a lot of the teams that are getting these fifth-year guys. The best ones and the ones that I think are going to be the most impactful fifth-year guys are going to be the guys that go back to where they came. Like I was talking about Cincinnati very early on along with Xavier, but now a team out there in your neck of the woods, Duquesne, they bring back Terrence Gunyard, a guy that led the way with 16 plus points per game. And I want you to take me through how big that is for Duquesne because I think that just completely changes the trajectory of this program and really elevates them in Atlantic 10 that I think is going to be quite difficult this season.
Yeah, I mean, the Dukes lost Jimmy Williams to Ohio State in the porter, and in normal circumstances, they probably wouldn't be able to afford to keep a guy like Ginyard, who was second in the conference in scoring last season. But thanks to these circumstances, they, were able to keep him. And without him, they likely was going to turn to Virginia Tech transfer Isaiah Pasha to be their potential lead guard, but he didn't really do anything last year, so that would have been a gigantic question mark. Now you know who your best player is. Now you can run the offense. And you got other pieces, with a high ceiling, such as a guy like Pasha, who now can play more off ball. And if he has a big year, now all of a sudden Duquesne could compete for a top four spot because they arguably have a top four player in the conference this year.
Totally agree with you. I thought that was one of the biggest things that we've seen over the last few weeks. And we do have to talk about this as well because there are obviously teams that are going to be looking to sign these fifth-year guys. Wasn't surprised that Oklahoma was able to get in the mix on it on Thursday. And we know the most famous one is LSU. They pick up Sky Clark about 24 to 48 hours ago. And how do we just take a look at LSU right now? Because there's a chance that they could be able to get a nice all-star lineup. We're still awaiting whether or not RJ Lewis is going to be available. I'm still thinking no, but with the way that the court cases are going for the NCAA, just never know there. But that said, when it comes to LSU, I feel like they might be the biggest team of mystery in all of college basketball. And they could be a big, giant disappointment, but I'm starting to see a possibility where they might surprise to the positive as well.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because the entire projected bottom half of the SEC has all been looking to game players. I mean, you mentioned Oklahoma being in the mix. Auburn gets a guy. Obviously, LSU is going to get a lot. So the SEC is going to get more talent, but doesn't necessarily make them all tournament teams. I don't know. And there is the matter of the chemistry question, because I think that's going to be really important for a lot of these teams. Like, say, whoever gets Keyshawn Hall, the former Auburn leading scorer, he's going to come in and be the number one guy. But, how would that affect the rest of the team who's been together for months already? So obviously there's going to be more talent for teams to get, but at the same time, how is it all ultimately going to fit? And these coaches are now at most going to have 60 days to get it together. And I'm not sure that's going to work out for some of these teams.
Yeah, I do think that is a big question with these guys, and it is going to be interesting to see what happens with them moving forward. As Tristan Freeman, he is doing such amazing work over at Bustin' Brackets and joining me right here on Coast to Coast Hoops, and we are seeing more and more moves. You've mentioned it with Kobe King heading on over to Auburn, and I think that's going to be really interesting to see what happens with the California court case, because that's when I think the rubber is really going to be meeting the road. Because the one hang up that a lot of these guys are having right now is some of these guys that maybe did not enter in the transfer portal early. I know that the NCAA is trying to do something about the, and air quotes here, ghost transfers. That'd be someone like a Donovan Donovan Dent, who didn't enter in the portal in time, and then they would try to discipline a coach and have them miss half the season, which I don't think that they're going to be able to do, but that's what the NCAA is looking to do. But how do you take a look at this landscape right now with that California case? Because I do think that if that goes away, the players and guys like Donovan Dent and company are able to latch on with teams, then that really causes things to heat up in a big way.
Yeah, I think the California case has the most notable of names when you also include a Xavier Lee, a Desmond Claude, and several others. So, and I think if you assume that these state cases continue to go away, it's all been going that they'll eventually get eligible and be able to transfer. But again, schools' deadlines are approaching for guys to enroll. So regardless of how long or how slow these court cases goes, guys are going to have to pick their spot anyways and enroll so that they can be eligible to play in November. So I think no matter what happens in the next, say, 2 weeks, expect a whirlwind of commitments for players and then figure out how their court cases are going to go.
Yep, I do think that that is going to be the case as well. And how much do you think that the NCAA sort of knows that they're going to be losing these court cases, but they want to do two things? And I talked about this yesterday on the podcast with Rocco Miller. He brought this up, and I thought it was a good point. For one, he wants to try to give the NCAA wants to try to give a goodwill effort to the teams that did it the right way, built their roster in like April, March, May, what have you, and they don't want to go down without a total fight for those teams. And for two, just try to draw it out as long as possible so that way maybe a couple fewer guys end up signing because it just is so laborious.
Yeah, I mean, it was drawn out enough to where it's probably not going to affect much of college football because the inability to transfer is going to leave all these players effectively stuck at their original teams. And so far, outside of Thomas Castellanos, Florida State, they're not, getting on to lawsuits, and their seasons literally starts in a couple weeks. So I do think as long as you get through the date for players to enroll, then I think you ultimately get to where you want if you're the NCAA. And there's still not a ton of spots. So I think all these players aren't going to find where they want. And I still think a percentage of them who's in these lawsuits will ultimately go pro anyways. But the NCAA created this mess by randomly passing in the middle of the offseason and are basically going to have to spend millions of dollars defending something that deep down inside they know isn't going to work because you can't explain why 5 for 5 is fine for the future, but this one class is going to be left out of it.
Yeah, it's a big issue for them, to say the least. And Tristan, we have seen a lot of news over the last few weeks. We've dove in on a few teams. Is there maybe a team or two that we haven't talked about that you're starting to just feel a little bit differently about? It could be bullish on them, bearish on them, but you just have been changing your tune a little bit because they now maybe have a little bit of a different roster makeup, and or you just have done a little bit more research and you're liking what you're seeing out of them.
Yeah, I'm keeping an eye out on USC, who, despite landing 10 transfers, a top 10 recruiting class, and bringing back 3 starters, still reportedly is looking for other players. And I'm, somewhat confused because I don't see where the minutes are. Maybe that's a sign that they're not fully comfortable with the guys they have. But considering the chemistry issues Muss's teams have had the last few years, I'm going to be concerned if you're adding, decent-sized names with expectations of a role, and it could possibly blow up in their face again.
Yeah, it has been rough over the last few years with the Muss bus. Even that last year over at Arkansas, that was not necessarily great. So I'm going to be very curious to see what happens there because I know there's been a lot of people talking them up. And a man that I'm always going to talk up is you, Tristan, because you're one of the best in the business. You're following the sport all 12 months out of the year. You've got your finger on the pulse of so much. So let the good people at home know it's all on tap for you and how people are able to follow along on social media and other platforms.
Yeah, you can follow me at HoopsNut351 on Twitter/X. You can also follow me at Bustin' Brackets, to Field 68 Dailies on Tuesdays, and Hoops HQ.
And Tristan is doing such a great job looking at this amazing sport of college basketball every single time he joins me, learns such great insights, and he did so once again today. So a big thanks to Tristan for joining me on Coast to Coast Hoops, now part of the VSiN family of podcasts. And if you do like what you're hearing from this fine podcast, Coast to Coast Hoops, you're able to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, Stitcher, and TuneIn. If you have a question, comment, segment idea, what have you for this podcast, you do have one or two ways to be able to fire those in. First one is my Twitter/X timeline at gunit_D1. Keep in mind, largely they mean does not matter, so as per usual, please do send these into the timeline. And the other way is find an Apple Podcast review. If you rate this podcast 5 stars, it's very much appreciated. From there, you're able to fire in whatever you'd like to hear on this podcast via that 5-star review. And I am indeed with you guys every single day on this podcast during the regular season and the off season. Once we get back in season, picks and analysis on every game every day, they are going to be back. And here in the off season, we're going to be taking a look at all the news that we're getting in college basketball. We're going to be diving in on all that we're getting with these court cases. We're going to get things all straightened up there, and we are going to make sure that this is going to be the most comfortable season of all time. So I appreciate you tuning in today, and I'll be back with you once again tomorrow. Thank you so much.